cannot speak for that long.
8 hours, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Okay, and we are live with another episode of React 30. Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Michael Jackson. Joining me today is my co-host, Ryan Florence.
Hello.
I should have introduced you as like John Muir or something like that, because you look very much like a naturalist here.
I got a shirt on, though. Should I take my shirt off? No.
Let's do a naked React 30, huh?
Yeah, naked React.
Our special guest today, we are super excited to welcome Nick Graff to the show. Say hi, Nick.
Hey, glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invite.
Yeah, man. Thank you for being here. So Nick, for those of you who do not know, is he's a contributor in a lot of different places in React. But most recently, I think he's been spending quite a bit of time doing Draft.js Plugins. And so if you're not sure what Draft.js is, Draft.js, for those of you who may not know, is an editor. It's a WYSIWYG editor that you can put right in your web page. It came out of Facebook earlier this year. I believe they announced it at ReactConf, right, in January?
Absolutely, yeah. For me, and I think it was, at least to me, it was the like most underrated release on a ReactConf ever.
Yeah.
Because it just happened, and Isaac were on stage, and like then it was a little bit on Hacker News, and I was like, okay, I mean, I was totally pumped by it. I was like, holy moly, I want to give this a try. And like, but in general, people were like, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
They didn't really pump it up, did
they? The difference must be just the kind of apps that they work on. Because when I was at Instructure, I explained our app is like, we're basically mix a little bit of Facebook with WordPress, and that's what our website is. And every bit of content that our users saw went through a WYSIWYG editor. Like basically our entire app went through a WYSIWYG editor. So when I saw Draft.js, I was like, this, if I still had my old job, would have been awesome. So what kinds of apps are you working on that made you so excited about Draft.js?
Actually, I didn't have a specific use case. It was just like in the past, I worked on a project management tool, and there was a lot of like, want to do auto completion on tasks, and like emojis and all that kind of stuff. And like even put in images and drag and drop them and basically like make it a very rich text editing experience. But then, yeah, back then it was super hard. I mean, using Backbone and all that kind of stuff. That I tried to build a lot of that stuff myself, but whew,
Did you ever use TinyMCE?
No, I never did.
Oh, okay. That's good.
I mean, I used some of those, and like I got pretty excited every time like something new was coming out. But then you give it a try, and it's like, yeah, not exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, the biggest thing about Draft.js was this immutable data structure, and that it completely syncs between the content editable and the data, and that like whenever you do a change, you have it right away in the data. When you change the data, it syncs back right away to the content editable, so to the DOM. And that's so powerful because, I mean, if you have all your things that is in content editable as data, you can simply save it. You can save it as data to the database, and that's so much more nicer than like just putting HTML into the database. I mean, this was like a super pain point for me in the past. Like,
yeah, because every time you pull it out of the database too, now you're screwing around with like serializing, deserializing. Oops, we deserialized twice, and so now everything's a mess. Oops, we serialized 3 times.
Yeah. And then
Handlebars has a bug.
So I don't know about you guys, but for me, content editable, I hear that term and it sends shivers down my spine. Like it just kind of like, whoa.
Good shivers or bad shivers?
No, bad. It's like you're messing with content editable. Oh man, you better watch out because there be dragons down there, you know.
Drag and drop.
Exactly. So that's what I'm kind of curious to know is how well, because you. So the reason content editable is such a pain to work with is because different browser vendors have interpreted the spec differently, which of course always happens anytime there's a spec. So how did they, how does Draft.js sort of paper over those inconsistencies? Have you found that it does it pretty well?
It does it pretty well. I don't know exactly how they do it internally, but I think what it does is it captures your keystrokes and all that kind of stuff, and then fixes the content, or it like maps it to the data and then back, if I'm not mistaken. But
because if you pass those keystrokes directly through to the underlying DOM API, right? Somebody does something as simple as I hit the Enter key, right? Yeah. And all the different browsers, in one browser that might be represented with a line break element, in another browser that might be represented with a completely separate div in the HTML, right? So you can't leave it up to them to to interpret it. You have to interpret it at the data model, and then you tell the browser basically, look, here's what your content should be, and also here's where the cursor should be, right? Here's what the current selection should be.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. You need to take care of content state and selection state, and that makes it quite a tricky concept, or quite hard to work with. But absolutely, it's super powerful.
Absolutely, cool. So you've been pretty happy working with it. So tell us when kind of you got the idea for Draft.js plugins. I imagine it was pretty quickly after they released Draft.js Core.
Yeah, so what you could see, like the first weeks after Draft.js being released, is like a couple of people worked on different editors. Like, I mean, the most basic thing is like everyone tried to match Medium, the Medium editor.
Yeah.
Like we built this with Draft.js. For me, the downside of this was like monolithic system that everybody built was like you had to use exactly their feature set, or don't use it at all, or build your own. And that was kind of like, meh. I want to have it pluggable. I want to use different components in different use cases, and even sometimes reuse them. Like if you have a comment field, you probably want to have add mentions. If you want to have status updates in Facebook, you also want to have add mentions, but maybe in one of them you want to have stickers, but not in the other.
I was just playing with the app mentions plugin right as you were saying that.
Nice. and so by the time I was at Stripe, so Stripe, I got this open source retreat grant, which allowed me to work for 3 months full-time paid by Stripe, and I was like super fantastic. And I actually had I planned to work on different projects. Something that I launched with Max Stoiber, Carte Blanche later on, but as well as Bell. But there was this itch. I saw all these people building out these huge projects, and I felt like we can make this so much nicer and easier if we just put a plugin system on top of it and build a couple of plugins. And it was like, for me, I planned to do it for like 3-4 weeks. And then like showcase it, but I got hooked and did it for like 7-8 weeks full time, just building the plugin system, and a couple of people jumped on so I mean the idea for me was to never make it a solo thing. I wanted to have build out this team and let different people build out different plugins, and in general I like to approach open source projects as build a team first and then work on the open source project.
Yeah, that's definitely a tricky part. Let's talk about that in just a little bit.
Sure,
because I would love to talk more about that specifically. Yeah. What I want to hit on first, though, is kind of your plugin API. You talked about kind of like composing in certain behaviors into an editor that aren't present in another version of that editor. Maybe you need mentions in one spot and you don't need them in another spot, but instead you want drag and drop photos, for example, whatever.
Sure.
So composing in these behaviors is something that the React component model is actually really, really good at. It's something we talk about a lot in our training workshops. What have you learned about kind of the composition model, and how are you using that specifically in the plugin API? To be honest, I haven't actually. I've kind of poked around on the website, but I haven't actually built an editor using Draft.js plugins. So tell me, as like a newbie, okay, so what is the API for that? What does that look like, and what have you learned about React as a result?
So to get started, Draft.js takes a couple of properties. So what you can give it is a custom style map. You can give it functions like render block function, and then it allows you to hook into this function hooks and override these objects, which allow you to do different things. And if you build it as a monolithic system, you basically have like one block render function, and then you do all the stuff in there. And what we thought about in the beginning, or the plugin architecture, how it basically works is, we took the editor and we extended it by, it takes now an additional, so it actually is a wrapper component. I thought about like using a wrapper component or a higher order component. Yeah. But we decided for wrapper. I can explain why a little bit later. But
yeah,
how it works is,
I think that's a great approach. So you take the editor that Draft.js gives you, and you wrap that in your own component. So you render one of those in your own component.
Yeah, and then what we did basically is that it accepts plugins, which are just plain JavaScript objects, which have all the properties that the Draft.js editor takes. Basically, as you return, a plugin is just an object, and if you have block render function on a plugin, it will go through all the plugins and call all of the block render functions from all the plugins. Basically, it checks like, does this plugin have a block render function? Then yes, call it, and do exactly what it be. So instead of having everything in one function as a monolithic thing, you basically split it up by the editor, and then you can compose, or like you have a kind of a plugin system where it's like, okay, the block render function part of the add mentions plugin sits in the mentions plugin, and the same part for like the sticker plugin sits in the sticker plugin, and then basically you just pass the whole thing down to the real Draft.js editor. That's awesome. Ideally, it would be cool if that would be in the core, but yeah, that's the thing. Facebook really right now doesn't really need it, and I really like the approach of like only building and using stuff they need by themselves. And I talked to Isaac in the beginning, like very early on, and he even gave like, Isaac is the creator of Draft.js plugins, Draft.js, sorry, and he gave a lot of really good feedback, and we came to the conclusion, okay, let's make this two separate projects, and they can help each other out. And like he was very influential on like how we do the plugin system and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a super smart approach. The only kind of thing that kind of comes to my mind is typically when I've built systems like that, sometimes what I do is I end up with two things that are like order dependent.
You know, like, definitely order dependent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's need like Express middleware. You know, like you need to use the cookie parser before you can like use the cookie session middleware or something like that. Have you guys run into any situations like that in the Draft.js plugins? Are there any plugins that you know are kind of, you're like, oh, those are out of order, you need to switch those around?
With the core plugins, not at all.
Okay.
Because, so, and that's also like, if you make everything like to match exactly what it needs, or to only do exactly what it should do, then you don't really run into this problem. But yeah, you need to be very careful, because once you start to write your own plugins and you be like, I don't know, if you match a whole text and you replace all of that text, then, and it bails out early because this plugin allows to, this plugin hook allows to bail out early of that whole chain, then you definitely run into order troubles. And yeah, basically that was like a trade-off that we took. And if you have a really good idea,
kudos to you guys for avoiding that problem in core, because I always run into that problem. In fact, I've been kind of dealing with that problem myself in the history library in a few spots. And just kind of, you have to really be careful, but I think you can avoid it. So if you guys have been able to avoid it, kudos to you guys, because that's awesome.
But it's, I mean, we know about it, or we knew about it when we wrote all these plugins. but then, yeah, if you give it to different people, new developers starting out with the API, you have to. I write it in a guide how to create a plugin. I made a note. Hey, be careful what you match and what you return, and where you bail out. But yeah, it's tricky.
Cool.
If you have a good solution to that, I'm really eager to hear.
I think you're just supposed to use the principles of functional programming.
How? What do I?
No, just wave your hands and it'll all work. It'll be fine.
No, actually, if you do observables.
Oh no, we're not going there. We're not going there.
We had a bunch of plugins built on top of TinyMCE for our software, and not only were things order dependent, but we were also like triggering events on the document with jQuery to like make things happen between plugins.
Because sometimes you just need a global, right?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
But, hey, we made a cool product with it. But yeah, your solution sounds pretty good.
That's actually, awesome. But we.
Sorry, Michael. You were trying to switch gears.
No. I'm fine. This is what this is all about. Go ahead, Nick.
The first couple plugins that I built, they were not too dependent on each other, and that made it really nice. But Benjamin, so currently, like, there's the 1.0 and.
Are you talking about Benjamin?
No, Benjamin Kiffler. It's his name, I think. I have to double check.
Okay.
But the first plugins that like I mainly built, they were like very independent. But he now started to, and that's for version 2. He started to build out like an image plugin and drag and drop and all that kind of stuff. And then you need to be plugins to be dependent on each other, but I'm not sure how version 2 will work out. What we might do is like make it more based on higher order components to have this kind of like wrapping for components. So for example, it could be the image plugin and then you wrap it with a drag and drop extension, something like this. But this is a little bit tricky because that's where we're currently struggling with, like how to do the architecture for more complex stuff where things get interdependent between plugins, or maybe they should not be different plugins. And
exactly. That's where I've kind of run into like maybe this shouldn't all be external. Like maybe this should all be a monolith.
Well, that's kind of what people have done with Flux, right? It's like as soon as you have 2 stores in Flux that need to know about each other, like, guess what? You only have 1 store.
Yeah.
Sure. And same. It seems to happen all over the place in our programming.
Yeah, but the thing is,
globals. So let's use globals.
Totally.
Let's say you have image and video. You could generalize the drag and drop code into something that lives on the outside and would be perfect for a higher order component. We just have to give it a try and see how it works out. Especially when you touch all of these DOM events, then things get tricky. But yeah, we're on the way to give this a try.
So when you're building these plugins, how much do you like? What percent of your time do you feel like I'm writing React code, and how much of the time do you feel like I'm writing terrible code so that other people can write React code? Is that question
hard to say? Yeah, but I'm definitely writing a lot more tricky code. I think it's not so much about like that it's terrible code, but it's more about like you need to know a lot about like different UI layer, different UI edge cases. For example, the mention plugin is area. Or works with all the area tags properly, and
thank you.
Basically, I mean, I copied it from Facebook initially, and then I read up all on the specs and so on and so forth, and checked if that was fine. But yeah, that's good. And they have a blind engineer who checks that stuff, and that's really good. But you get to really tricky interdependencies. For example, you have with React, you have this nice way of composing things, and you could have like an outer element, which is the autocomplete, and then you have the separate entries. But the problem is with the area attributes is that the outer component needs to know the ID of the inner element, and it needs to know exactly what's active. And this is really ugly, because you cannot have this dropped like top to bottom anymore. You actually have to, from the child, have to go and tell the parent, hey, I'm Harvard now, or I'm updated. And then this is like a lot of stuff that is, it's not particularly hard, but you just need to know about that stuff, and then you start to write a lot of code where you feel like, you're breaking out of this nice composition pattern where you're like, it's just top to bottom.
Yeah, and sometimes with ARIA stuff you can not do that. There's like an alternative where you could have like there's a different attribute that you could use. So instead of using a selected ID, you could have like a value that you get out of that thing and just keep it at the top. But even then, you still got to send the value up. But yeah, that stuff gets rough. Ember was actually really cool here, because Ember put.
Oh no, I think we lost him. Hold on, Ryan, we lost you for just a second. You said Ember was cool here because Ember.
If we could maybe just leave it at that, I guess. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. You're going well.
Yeah, Ember put IDs on all of your elements and components automatically for you, and so everything always had an ID.
Nice.
And of course, since it was two-way bound, you could like just send that thing up really easily to the top component. Where in React, I found I had to like keep my own counter and add my own IDs to things. And then you got to write the code like, well, did they already provide an ID? Yes, they did. Okay, let's not use the one from the global counter. And yeah, it was it's a little bit more work for that in React.
Yeah, nice. One thing to add here is I think a lot of the plugins, they just take away a lot of work in terms of, because the Draft.js APIs is not that simple. You have to first you have to learn about the concepts. You need to know that there's this editor state, and inside you have the content state, the selection state. In the content state, you have blocks. Then per block, you have text and character list and all that kind of stuff. And basically, my goal with these plugins was that if you only need like 1 to 2 features, like add mentions or image upload or stuff like that, image drag and drop, that you don't have to you don't need to know the internals of Draft.js. You just can go import Draft.js plugin editor, run this, add this one plugin, do a little bit of configuration, maybe styling, theming, which is not too hard or not too tricky, and then you get this really nice feature out of the box. And where I would love to see people going is, I mean, now we have this super nice tool that allows you to build same content editable features based on content editable. And what I'd love to just see is like a lot of people making way better experiences with this, with a lot of these features. Like, I think a lot of websites would just be way nicer to use if I could use hashtags, add mentions, and just image management inside a text field.
Yeah, if it was just a plugin npm install, like everyone could just have it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's where
I always used to really envy people who did like stuff on iOS, because a lot of that stuff is just done for them. Like insert an emoji, and you tell an iOS developer like, "Oh, that's going to take me a while to do that on the web like properly," and they look at you like, "What do you mean? Why don't you just have like a text view and somebody just types an emoji?" And you're like, "Oh, it doesn't really work that way."
Because everybody's not on an iPhone, that's why.
Exactly.
Especially with emojis, I can tell stories. It's really tricky.
Tell us your horror story.
Yeah, tell us an emoji story.
Like I implemented emojis and it worked well, and then it's like pretty cool. And then you hit backspace. And then you figure out that an emoji is actually because it's this you to have something. I can't
multi-byte character, right?
Yeah, exactly. It has like it takes up space for 2 characters. So if you hit the backspace on an emoji, and you can try this in Medium, like it still is the case on Medium. Put in emoji and set the cursor right after the emoji, hit backspace, and what you get is like a question mark character, because it's just some kind of gibberish of
it deleted 1 byte, but it didn't delete the other byte. So it only has half the data it needs to render the emoji, and then it's like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, I just did it.
Yeah, and it works, right?
That was awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, of course, Draft.js has a pretty cool feature that allows you to save these, like solve this problem, because what you can do is you can connect characters with an entity, and you can say they're mutable. So if you remove one part of it, it removes the whole thing. This is exactly what you do when you type in. Or it can be segmented, it can be mutable, or it can be mutable. And and then with making it immutable, it's connected, and then you can, whenever you remove this emoji, it's really gone completely.
That's awesome. So what is the output of Draft.js then? Is it HTML at any point in time? Like if I want to save this off into a database and then I wanted to reboot up my Draft.js editor, what do I give it? Is HTML the serialization format, or do they have some higher level kind of string format?
There's a kind of a data. So what you internally, it's structured in you have this content state, and the content state has blocks which usually are lines, but I mean you can make it, if you let it float, then it's not a line anymore.
Yeah, public API.
Yeah, that's a public API, and what you can do then is you can convert this content state to a JSON structure.
Okay.
And this JSON structure basically has like everything in there. So if you have entities in there and all sorts of other stuff, then it just gets part of this.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Structure. You can put it into the database, and you can recreate the editor state, or in particular this content state, with the same JSON again.
That makes sense.
Really cool.
Yeah.
It's like super awesome.
Awesome. So we only have just a few minutes left. You touched on something earlier that I totally wanted to touch on. Because I think it's. Are you saying for the same reason that I'm thinking?
I guess I know what you guys want to talk about.
No, so I just wanted to talk about just kind of what you were mentioning earlier about like managing an open source project, getting people involved. You mentioned something about how you like to have the team in place. I know you've had a lot of help from people like Max. You mentioned somebody named Benjamin, who I don't know. Tell me, who is kind of the team that you're working with here, and how have you managed to kind of assemble that team and learn to work together on these projects?
Yeah. So in general, what I want to do is I learned over the time is that like managing an open source project by yourself is first of all really hard, because it's a lot of work. And second of all is I really like to work in teams, because even if you're super experienced in an area, you miss out on like things, on like architecture improvements, or just shortcuts in development and all sorts of stuff. And so I always think of like, okay, if I want to work on something, and I want to work on it with a team. And so like the way where the first open source project, not the first one, but the first one I did with React was Bell, this UI library. And there, what I learned is like you can sometimes, when you want to create something big, you probably have to start out first and like make people interested. And that's what I always like do now. It's like I come up with a prototype, show it to people, and say like, hey, are you interested to work on this with me? And let's make it a team and then work on it together. And that worked for Bell. A friend of mine, Jyoti from India, she joined, and like she was super helpful. And I mean, she did amazing things there. Like I never wanted to touch a date picker, and in the end, because she was motivated, we created the date picker, and
Awesome.
and then and that's how I started out with Draft.js as well, the Draft.js plugins. I wanted to build this team. To be fair, it's really hard because I mean, if people have jobs, and like most of them do, including me, it's a lot of work.
And if they don't, they're doing open source to get a job.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and but I still feel like only as a team you can really. I mean, open source to me is like it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you really have to get in those people, work on it together. It's way more fun. You can it's way easier to manage. You don't miss out on things. You can go on vacation and don't feel bad about it.
Hey, I like that.
I agree with everything you're saying here, Nick. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Unfortunately we're out of time. Sure. Is there anybody you want to give a shout out to? Any of your Draft.js collaborators you want to give a shout out to real quick?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Benjamin, Pascal. Pascal was with me in the open source retreat. Benjamin did a lot of the image management, table plugin, all that kind of stuff. He's really good. He's awesome. Joti, Max, especially in the beginning for a lot of work on the documentation. Super thankful to them.
Documentation is so important. I think I just finally realized that documentation is actually more important than the code.
Yeah, I mean, you can
there's a greater than relationship there. Documentation is over here.
And then if you just write self-documenting code, you solve both problems, right?
Right, self-documented code.
Oh, just read the source code. Why can't you figure it out?
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, you can write the most awesome code, but if nobody understands how to use it, it's worthless.
Exactly.
Yep. If anybody wants to see a great example of that, go and look at my mock library on GitHub. It's thousands and thousands of amazing lines of undocumented code.
Couldn't even get his business partner to use it.
I remember I tried to get Ryan to use it, and there was a comment in the code. So the library was called mock, and he goes, I sure wish that mock had some docs.
I spelled it D-A-C-H.
D-A-C-H, just like I spelled mock. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to use this anymore. All right, Nick, thank you so much for being on our show, man. It was a blast talking to you. I think Draft.js plugins are in very good hands, and I think, I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing in open source. I think it's awesome. Can't wait to hang out again. So thank you for being on the podcast, and best of luck to you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.